everybody, this is Glitch, and today we're going to review I won't say gem, but here's a personal favorite of mine.
It's been almost 10 years since I first tried this. I've been inspired to do reviews and Let's Plays for years after watching people like Some Call Me Johnny, Brain Scratch Comms, AVGN, and the like. In my first year of college, I wanted to make a review and start doing what I saw other people doing. Unfortunately, I didn't have a good way to record gameplay, so I set up a camera and pointed it at myself sitting at a table while playing and showing Quest 64. Unlike now, that video was completely unscripted. I kept the video, but I was a bit embarrassed by it, and it made me want to try again. Luckily, this time I'm more experienced, but this is such a strange game. I would talk about the story, but it's almost as if the developers forgot to write one. The game itself starts with your character being told to find your father, who went on a journey of his own. This character's name is the best character name in all fantasy stories, a name that would inspire tales of heroism across the ages and would make any force of evil tremble in fear. His name is Brian. Yeah. It is funny to me that they give this character a name, but for me, it would have made a lot more sense if the game allowed you to pick your own name. In fact, that was originally intended in earlier versions. But Brian it is, I guess. Brian here is tasked with searching for his father, who had gone missing while searching for a MacGuffin known as the Telltale Book. Take note of this plot point, as we will be referencing it later. Now, we first run over to the first village in the game, Dondoran, where the king there tells us that a thief has stolen an earth gem. This leads us over to a nearby forest to fight a boss. I would share the names of these characters, but it really doesn't matter. They are as unimportant as this inconsequential plot. They're set dressing. The only important character you can meet is Shannon. You'll find her in the ends throughout the game, and she is somehow the only reoccurring character you will see in the entire game. The story can mostly be summed up with go to a town, fight a boss, move on. And it's not as if I'm skipping over the story. If you try and look up the story, most places, such as Wikipedia, only have a single paragraph to explain it. I'm not kidding when I say it is practically non-existent. Now, I mentioned the Telltale Book, which is supposed to be the important part of this plot. However, this is only brought up 3 times in the entire game, and one of those times is completely missable. About halfway through the game, Brian heads to a desert and can find a pyramid-like structure where someone talks about holding the Telltale Book and unleashing a plague onto a small village that the structure once sat inside. It's a honestly very interesting bit that tells us what this book is capable of in the wrong hands. Why the hell is this plot point missable? If the Telltale Book is supposed to be important to the story, then why is it only referenced 3 times? Plus, we are told to get these elemental gems, but they have little to no bearing on the plot. These gems are orbs, feel like the game wants to invoke some elements of Final Fantasy, but they might as well not even exist. Something about this that I find interesting is that Brian has the ability to cast spells based on the four elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. You can easily cast spells by pressing the C buttons on the Nintendo 64 controller. However, after looking at the game's development, there was apparently a fifth element that was planned but never implemented. This was an ethereal element, and if I had to guess, this turned into the experience that you can gain from fighting monsters. Another thing that wasn't implemented was a money system. That's not to say there isn't any items or things you can obtain, because there's plenty of that. The monsters you fight only ever give you experience and somewhat rarely items. You can also gain items from different NPCs throughout the game, but you never spend a single cent on them. Even the ends where you save your game and re-heal are completely free. This isn't a bad thing, but it doesn't really incentivize you to fight monsters outside of leveling your character up. The problem is, you can level up Brian's stats outside of battle as well. Scattered across the world, you'll find these bubbles coming up from the ground. These are spirits. Interacting with one will raise Brian's element by 1. You get to choose which one, of course. The elements max out at level 50, but you aren't really able to max out all of the elements, even if you grind enemies in the game. To be fair, I don't want to fully say it's not worth it to fight enemies, especially because the first boss alone will kick your ass. The only other fights I've had to deal with that are this hard early on in an RPG are fights that you are either supposed to lose or fights from a From Software game. Hey, get back you! You will have your time. I want to get this out of the way. If you are playing this game for the first time, level up water until you learn healing spells, and also focus on earth. Why these two? Because healing in any RPG is extremely helpful. Plus, then you wouldn't be using any healing items and can save them for harder bosses. Now, why would you choose Earth? Because at level 36 you learn Magic Barrier. This spell makes Brian immune to all magic attacks. Why is this important? Because every enemy attacks using magic. That means if you cast this spell, you basically give Brian invincibility until it wears off, where all you have to do is cast it again until you win every fight. This will guarantee you make it to the end of the game. But even then, it's not like there's a whole lot of substance to this game. As I said before, the story is almost non-existent. Making it to the final boss, you finally find Brian's father, the entire reason for him going on the quest in the first place, but it doesn't feel like I made an epic quest to make it here. It feels like I walked down to the grocery store to get some milk. While you're here, you fight Mammon, a giant demon boss, before he reveals that he wasn't even the big bad. The real puppet master is Shannon, the NPC you see throughout the game at the end. The game never once hints at this. It comes off as if the developers wanted to give a reason for this NPC constantly reappearing every town you visit, and decided this was a good reason for her being a recurring character. It wouldn't be so bad if the game alluded to this at all, but again, there's no story here for us to latch onto. It feels almost as if this game is someone's first attempt at a role-playing game in RPG Maker. It has some good ideas, but at the end of the day, the game is so bare of content that it feels like it could fall apart at any moment. There is something I do find interesting about this, however. The game would be released a year later in Japan with some improvements. For starters, they added a colored mist around Brian to indicate when a stat had leveled up. The battle system was also slightly revamped. In boss fights, every time you defeat one, your HP would level up slightly, whereas in the Japanese version, it levels up both health and magic. Don't know why this was changed or even different, but it's there. On top of that, the American and European versions, for some reason, won't let you interact with signs, so you can end up getting lost incredibly easy just trying to get from place to place, whereas the Japanese version gives you the option to actually read the signs. On top of that, the American and European versions of the game had the game cut to a text crawl when you beat the game. It's very abrupt, but that's apparently how they felt was good to end the game. However, the Japanese version has an actual ending with the characters you meet reflecting on your journey. Despite the game not really having much connected story, it is a nice ending, and I wish it was something that was in the other releases. I personally wish the Japanese version would get translated because it feels like it's the definitive version of the game. Not that that's saying much because there's still a lot of things that should be here that just aren't. One more thing to note is the game got a sort of reboot slash demake on the Game Boy Color called Quest Brian's Journey. I'm gonna be frank, I haven't really played this outside of trying it, but it seems to expand on the story of its big console counterpart. It came out in the year 2000, and from what I've seen of it, it feels almost as if this was what the devs originally intended to do with Quest 64, but didn't have time to finish the game. Which, in and of itself, is a shame because the game was apparently in development for around 2 years before it finally came out. There's a ton of stuff that was left on the cutting room floor with this game, and frankly, I feel as if the game itself needs a remake or something. Imagineer, the company that made the game, is still in business, but they don't care about Quest 64 anymore. I bet most devs who worked on this game, if they are still at the company, would rather just forget it. But I don't feel like this game deserves that. This game had promise to be a grand RPG for a system that was starved for them. Ocarina of Time wouldn't be out for a few months from the American launch of this game, and while it's not a traditional RPG, Ocarina of Time is just a better game. Even the more traditional RPGs that did eventually come to the system blew Quest 64 out of the water, leaving Nintendo 64's first role-playing game to be remembered as an awkward attempt at the genre. It got middling reviews when it finally came out, despite it being very hyped up and everyone being excited for this game. But it doesn't have to be that way. Now, I am no programmer, but I can tell stories, and it's one of my favorite things to do. Imagine a version of this game where Brian's quest is a grander story. He is trying to find his father and the stolen Eltel book. Along the way, he retraces the steps of his father. He may have grown up in a monastery learning magic, but he's such a remedial level that all he knows is very basic spells. As he journeys across Keltland, however, he becomes more adept at his magic and gets to a level that would not only put his peers to shame, but would make even his teachers jealous. As he slowly obtains each town's elemental gem in order to seal the Eltale book away once more, he learns how to better control the elements and fight the monsters that have become stronger. All the while, he learns of the effects of the book and what could happen if it falls into the wrong hands. The further along he goes, the more he learns of a beast who was also seeking the book. A beast known as Mammon wishes to use the powers of the book and lays siege to the land. Brian would meet up with Shannon, who would help him on his journey to Mammon's domain, while also teaching him more dangerous spells, sort of like Sheik in Ocarina of Time. Once he makes it to Mammon's domain, Brian finds his father, who gives him the Eltale book that he was sent to find himself, and tells him the book is too dangerous for the world and must be destroyed. Before he can do so, Shannon steals the book for her master, revealing that she had been following Brian from the start and tricked him so she could steal the book for Mammon. With the book in his possession, Mammon begins to lay siege to the world, but Brian tries to fight him. In a big climatic battle, Brian uses his new mastery of the elements and the power of the Eltale book itself to defeat Mammon, sealing him away in his own realm before destroying the book. With the land saved, the people rejoice as Mammon is defeated. With the monsters returning to their own lands, Shannon finds that she is still alive, despite her master being defeated and the destruction of the book returning the lands to normal. She was seemingly spared from death. She too thanks Brian and hopes that wherever he is now, they will meet again. The credits roll, showing the places you've been to throughout the game and how they've changed. Brian and his father return to the monastery before Brian chooses to leave. Having learned everything he can in Keltland, he ventures off on a new adventure. Now, that is just my very basic idea of how I would rework this story, what little of it there is. And I'm sure many other people would come up with their own take on how to fix it. As for gameplay, I would keep it mostly the same. Maybe reduce the grindy nature of the game and streamline some elements. The spell system definitely works and is unique. Hell, I'd have it where as you master elements, Brian learns how to combine them. Maybe have it where you can combine water and fire to make steam and disorient an enemy for starters, or even fire and earth make flaming rocks or lava that could damage an enemy much better. This game for me has always been in a strange position. Similar to Sonic 06, it shows a ton of promise, but that has been stripped down and cut just to get it out the door. I didn't even get to mention the fact that this game was meant to have 3 playable characters. Much like Sonic 06, however, I can't really bring myself to hate this game. It is definitely rushed and unfinished, but it has a strange charm to it. I honestly recommend people try this at least once. And that being said, if you do play this game, I recommend trying the Miro mod first. It gives the ability to customize and fix a handful of things this game has, such as reducing the encounter rate of enemies while also increasing the experience output. And yeah, it does feel like every 5 steps you take, an enemy appears. I also recommend a few videos on this game that I'll have linked in the description below. One is Level Jake's A Case for Quest 64 series. While I criticize the lack of plot, he was able to piece together what little story this game has, and frankly, it's fairly interesting. I also recommend Computer Lab Hijinks' video, Quest 64 is unfinished and you should play it. There, he goes into the issues the game had and even mentions the differences between the Japanese and American versions a bit more than I did. I'm gonna be honest, this game is just bizarre. It's not even a bad game, it's just there. I get why some people may have just looked it over, but like I said, it doesn't have to be that way. If some talented modder really wanted to, they could get this game and maybe piece it together using other elements, like, say, reuse parts of the story that was expanded on in the Game Boy Color version. And hell, if anyone wants to use the somewhat bare story that I have as a starting off point, go ahead. It had promise. As I said, I can't really bring myself to hate this game. It's not great, but it's almost like a bad movie that a friend recommends you. Yeah, you know it'll be bad compared to others, but it should at least be experienced once in a gamer's life. And frankly, this is one of those games that I feel could benefit from a remake more than something like The Last of Us. But money is how we get sequels, and companies are less likely to want to bring back old games that didn't do well. With that being said, Merry Christmas, Quest 64. And as for you guys, Happy Holidays. Thanks for sticking around this year and watching me do whatever it is I'm doing.